In the family, there is a thing that we call headship. The Bible does teach that a man is to lead his family. It does teach that, and if you don't like that, I understand that, but do not call yourself biblical, because you're not. You're influenced by your own culture. You're influenced by the teachings of feminism and everything else, but you're not biblical. Okay? Let's just stay that. There is teaching in Scripture about the headship of a man and his family. There is teaching about submission. The wife is to submit to her husband. Many people hate that because of teachings of feminism. Other people hate it because of the massive abuses in regard to that teaching. Now, let me just give you an example. Let's go back to what I was teaching about men. If my wife looks at me and she sees a man who is consumed with himself, consumed with his own desires, consumed with his own career, consumed with his own hobbies, maybe even consumed with his religion, consumed with his ministry, consumed with his own religious goals, then when she reads in Scripture that she ought to submit to that man, it creates nothing but anger and bitterness in her life. I'm called to be the helper to this man's purposes, and all his purposes are about him. That just creates bitterness, anger. Okay? But if my wife looks at me and sees a man who has thrown away his own purposes, thrown down his own personal whims and desires, and she sees a man who is given toward this, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. She sees a man given to the purposes of God, then it is a lot easier for her to say, I will work with him. I will submit to that, his leadership, because his leadership is not directed toward his own goals, his own purposes. It's directed toward the will of God. And I see in his life sacrifice. I see in his life desire, passion, and love for others. Thus I will join him. Do you see that? If men have a sin, a specific sin, it is self-centeredness, selfishness. As a matter of fact, most men just marry their mom. They want to marry someone who's going to take care of them just like good old mom took care of them. Now, but let's look at something else. Let's say that that man is all about, Lord, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. So he's in the ministry 24 hours a day, and he is neglecting his wife, and he's neglecting his children. Then she looks at that and goes, this is, well, once again, anger, bitterness. As a man, my life must be directed toward, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. But my ministry of advancing God's will on this earth should be marked out in concentric circles. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, first of all in me. If I'm going to be a useful servant of the Most High God, His kingdom has to come in me. His will has to come in me. I must be conformed to the image of Christ. I must work on self. In order to be a useful servant, well, I can only be a useful servant to the degree that I am conformed to the image of Christ. My character must change. I must learn to live the principles of Jesus Christ. Of He did not come to serve Him, to be served, but to serve others. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. To live the sacrificial cross life of Jesus Christ. That of giving your life away. So when I talk about Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done, I can't be trying to go out and try to advance the kingdom in different places when the kingdom isn't advancing in me. To bring Christianity upon a people when I myself don't live the principles of Christianity. Living the radical Christian life is not listening to Christian music or wearing a t-shirt with a verse on the back of it. It is dying to self in service to others. But where does that service begin? For me, it begins with my wife. It doesn't begin with lost cities. It doesn't begin with countries where the gospel isn't preached. As a man who in the providence of God is now married, my first ministry, after dealing with my own conformity, my own need for growth, it is to turn to this woman and to minister to her.